In this video, Diana Elder, accredited genealogist professional, will share some tips for source analysis. She'll share an example of her own research in Izard County, Arkansas, and she'll talk about land and tax records for our ancestor, John C. Klein. And so in this, she will share a little bit about how to analyze sources, information, and evidence, and talk about how she did that with her example. This is an excerpt from the Research Like a Pro online course, Office Hours, which meets every month to discuss the Research Like a Pro steps and to answer questions from members of the course. I hope you enjoy this excerpt.
So, first of all, we are going to just do a little bit on analyzing sources. And I find that we do have the step during the timeline, but all along, as you research, you have to keep analyzing. And I'm going to use some examples from my research that I am right in the middle of right now to show this. We never can stop, and we keep analyzing when we're writing our report. All the way through, we are working on this analysis. So here are some tips that I thought we would have some fun with. So, sometimes I think we tend to be a little bit of source snobs, and I think this might be Tom Jones who coined that phrase, source snobbery. But we really want to look at all the available sources because we never know what kind of clues they're arranged differently, and maybe we can gather some different things just from a different arrangement. And I'll show you an example of that. We also want to just discover the value of each source type. If there is a book of abstracts, there is a value to something like that over an original record. And then, of course, we really need to understand the source. And I think all of us who are right in the middle of researching are finding that that's not always as easy as it seems. We put in our research plan to search a collection, but then if we find there's a conflict or something doesn't make sense, we've got to go back to square one and work on understanding that source. And so often that can help us to discover what we're looking at. And I think we'll see several examples of that as we discuss some of the questions this evening as well. So here's an example I wanted to show you of two types of sources for the same record. And these are Izard County, Arkansas tax records. I started off using this derivative source. This is a book published. It's in the Family History Library, which is where I've used it. And notice that it is alphabetical order, not by date. So we have got all sorts of different date ranges here, and it is 1829 to 1866. Well, hopefully you can see that that's really valuable because if you have no idea when your person lived there, you could quickly get an idea of all the relevant hits for a surname. And I love using a source like this when I'm just starting a project. If somebody has gone in and done the work to abstract the wills or court records or land records or tax records, that can save us so much time. Then we have an exact year and we can go find the original. So I love to start with these, but I also think it's just really instructive to have it alphabetized and see who else might be with that same surname. Now, in this case, it's really interesting that my research subject is John Klein, but he was here abstracted as John Clean. So I was curious, is that really how his name was written in the records, or was that a misspelling? And we can see that there's some land description given here, but this is all I get. And if you have done tax research before, you know that often they're asking about how many horses and mules and cattle, those types of things as well. And those can give us clues to our ancestors. So, of course, we want to track down the original. So I made a good discovery as I was working on my locality research that these tax records, as you might think that they would be in the county of the Family Search catalog, they're actually in the state. You can only access them through Arkansas, the state record. And then from there, you can pick the county out. So that had tripped me up. And for a while, I thought that there was no record, there was no original record for that. But is this really an original record? So when I studied this and looked at this, I saw that it was a state copy of the original county tax books. And this is a burned county. All these records were burned. And so thankfully, these were sent to the state where they recopied them and put them in alphabetical order. And this is the best I have. This is the closest to the original available. So technically, it would be a derivative, meaning it was copied from an original, but it was pretty close to the time of the event. So, you know, whether we say original or derivative, I don't think it matters as long as we understand what was happening and what was going on here. So could the person who copied this have maybe misread it? Maybe the Klein, it was really Klein and he copied in as clean if the handwriting was poor? Of course, very possible. And we can see that the derivative was correct, though. It really does say clean, and the derivative record, that abstract, copied it in absolutely right. So here we have in the original, we have the land description. And then over here, which I don't have pictured, we have the horses and the cattle and all the other good stuff. Now notice something else. This little column over here was not in that derivative record. I'll go back. There's nothing about this little extra column here. And looking at the top, I saw that this was the original landowner. So John Clean or Klein was the original landowner. Here's his land description. And then we have John C. Clean or Klein with no land. These little things just mean no. Sometimes we think they're dittos and they're not. Looking at all of them, they are just meaning no land, no cattle, whatever. This is poll tax. So both men paid a poll tax. So this looks like we have two men here in 1839. Okay, so now when we go to taking the information out of a source like that, we really stop and consider the informant, but then we also need to consider who is recording it, the copyist, the clerk, and think about their knowledge of the person. You know, if you're working with, say, German ancestors, could they speak German? Would they know how to spell German surnames? Would they have just written it however it sounded? You know, we can often learn a lot more about the records and the information in those by taking a look at seeing who this is. And we don't always know, but it can be helpful to see, oh, it's the same county clerk, and he has been the county clerk for 10 years. He knows everybody in the county, you know, that type of a thing that can help us. And then, of course, we want to break down the information in the source. So we want to break down each piece of information in each source. So as we're doing our research and we come up with a record, we want to take it apart, not get in a hurry. Sometimes we want to just go on to the next piece of our research plan, but it's so important to take the time to really make sure you're understanding what is going on in the source. So I have got tax lists, as I showed you, for John and John C. Clean. And when I abstracted them in, I found that this is what I found. So we're going to try to see if we can figure something out here. So John Clean, I'm just going to call him Klein, was the original owner of the land tax. He's the present owner of all property taxable, and he paid a poll tax. And so here's his property. And it's $120 value. He had a horse, a cow, and so he paid this much of his tax. Now, underneath him is John C. Klein. There's no original owner, but there's a poll tax, and he has a horse and 4 cattle for a total of $75. So I thought that this was interesting because my hypothesis is that John C. Klein is the older gentleman and that he is perhaps the father here. So I am just wondering if maybe when the copy was made, that the names were perhaps mixed up. I don't know for sure. I have got to keep working on correlating all of this, but this doesn't quite add up with what I know about some of the other records. So I'm just keeping in mind that, you know, this could be right, but maybe there is something a little bit off. Which brings us to evidence. So direct evidence can be wrong. I mean, I have direct evidence that these men paid taxes, but that all depends on if it was copied correctly and if it was, reported correctly in the first place. So we have to just be aware of that. And then if we want to use indirect evidence, that is when we bring it all together in the report. So if you're researching and you are finding all these different pieces of the puzzle and you're just seeing connections, you might want to just go ahead and start writing that up. Write some notes in your project document to help you make sense of it, which is exactly what I'm doing because I'm trying to make sense of a lot of little facts. And then if we want to use negative evidence eventually, just know you've got to really do a lot of research. You can't just say, oh, he's gone. He probably died. I'm going to use that as negative evidence. But you would need to have some reasonably exhaustive research. You would have not needed to have done a bit more than just making that supposition. So, okay, so now we're going to go to some correlation, and this hopefully will help explain why maybe I thought John C. Klein was the senior. So, part of my research plan was to get the original land descriptions and land applications. And so I did that. I had those ordered from the National Archives in Washington, D.C. for me, an abstract to those. And I found the original dates. Before that, I only had the date of the land patent, which is usually 2, 3, 4 years after the application. So I couldn't quite put into context when John or John C. would have been on the land because I didn't know, because it takes a little bit of time for that patent to be issued. But I found in the land applications that he first applied in 1838 for this northwest quarter of the northeast quarter of section 20. Well, if we look down here, we see that correlates John Klein with this John Klein of the tax record. And then we see that later in a later year, I believe this was, oh, now I'm not remembering. Let's see, probably 1841. We still have John Klein who is paying taxes on that same bit of land. So that really correlates. And then we have John C. Klein who applied for land patent in 1839. And here in 1839, he's not being taxed for that land yet. So I'm not sure why. That land doesn't show up until a later tax list. So what I'm going to do is go through, I've got several tax and I've got several land things to correlate. I'm going to try to see if consistently we have this John C. Klein being taxed for the same land. Is this one man or two? I don't know. I'm still a little confused. It seems like this would be two here, but on this record we have John Klein, and then see where it says same? This means that this is the same person here, and I think they've just forgot to put the C in here, but here they have the C. So I hope you can see how this is confusing. It's confusing me, and I'm just trying to figure it out, but I have more to come. So just kind of see this. So here's another thing that puts a wrinkle in it, and this is the boundary change that happened right in the middle of all of this. So those first land patents were in Izard County, which here it is in 1841. In December of 1841, they create Fulton County up here, and it takes that top half off. Well, in some of the Kleins who applied for land, there's a John Klein who applied for land just a few years later, and he was a Fulton. There's a Mahala Klein who applied for land, and she was a Fulton. And then there's John C. Klein who applies for more land, and he's a Fulton. So I feel like they were probably just living here on the border. And at one time they were part of Izard, and then they become part of Fulton. So I was excited to see that because then I knew I could go search the Fulton County tax records. And when I did that, I found something pretty surprising. I found John Klein in 1851, and I'll mention that John C. Klein is in the 1850 census, and he's old. He's 65, I believe. But then here's John Klein, no mention of John C. Klein. And then I just was paging through, I don't know why, just because, and this caught my attention. Here in the W's, we have John C. Klein's estate. So in the W's, we have John C. Klein's estate. Why couldn't they have gone back here and made a little note, see the W's for John C. Klein? But they didn't, and I'm glad I found it. That was providential. So here's all the different land descriptions, and they are correlating with what I know about the John C. Klein land. Anyway, I have a lot of things, but see, John C. Klein in 1850 was 65 years old, which is why I'm thinking he's the older. So this is really interesting. It's a fun case, and I'm right in the middle of it, and I'm writing and correlating and trying to figure things out. But I just wanted to use this as an example to show you that all the way through your research, we are looking at this, we're trying to understand the records, we're trying to analyze and see what we can use as evidence.